special CNBC Africa broadcast. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa. We're coming to you from Empress Palace in Johannesburg, where the Gauteng Premier is hosting the heads of African diplomatic missions. Let's find out from him what is on the agenda for tonight's conversation.
We'll have this opportunity. It's something I've always wanted to do since coming into office in May last year. Saying to our Minister of International Relations and the Dean of African Diplomats in our country, Ambassador Mpoko, that we would like an opportunity to interact with the heads of missions, to firstly share with them what our view and vision is for the future and what role we think we would like to play in Africa's rising. And discuss with them as well what we would think we should be doing to promote Africa, the inter-Africa trade, and ensure that more African business people from South Africa, from our province, see Africa as an opportunity for them, not just for outsiders.
The Premier is clearly moving fast to bring the African political community closer to the province's business community.
We are the diplomatic capital of South Africa. Secondly, we are the industrial and financial hub of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. In that way, we have a very important role to play in Africa's development, Africa's Agenda 2063, Africa's industrialization, and Africa's regeneration and renewal. So we will have this opportunity. It's something I've always wanted to do since coming into office in May last year.
Part of why we want to have this regular interaction with you, I know the Mayor of Tshwane actually does it very regularly, is to, one, we want you to feel at home, away from home. That you know you have an accessible government here, the cities and the regional government, the Gauteng government, to talk to on various issues.
The Premier's efforts appear closely aligned with the province and its various cities as they push to become increasingly competitive. The Executive Mayor of Tshwane underscored the two-way relationship between the diplomatic community and the city that is home to the second largest diplomatic corps after Washington, D.C.
I think in the first instance it gives us a pristine opportunity to engage with the diplomatic community, for us to have an appreciation of the kind of innovations, interventions they are making in their own countries to resolve almost similar challenges that we get to experience at the city level. The issues around traffic congestion, waste collection, policing, poverty, hunger, you mentioned them. So these are things that they get to experience in their own localities. And I guess that there are many similarities with peer cities on the African continent. We need to the extent that is possible, export some of those, or rather import some of those solutions to help us to resolve some of our challenges. I think the second one, it gives us an opportunity to have a rich tapestry of cultural diversity. I mean, we host the diplomatic fair at the lawns of the union buildings. We get to taste the foods from various parts of the country. And it also gives the people of Tshwane an opportunity to have a better appreciation of the continent in its totality. I guess one of the major deficits with regards to the conversation around development in South Africa is that we tend to remove ourselves from the African continent. We see it as some part of the world that South Africa is not part of. And it's through staging of diplomatic fairs that people get to see that there's a lot in common between us and the rest of our sister cities on the continent. And I guess it also gives us an opportunity, as these are ambassadors who get to sell their country, and invariably they get to sell our country. And the one location that they know much better than any other place in this country is the city of Tshwane. So you get to benefit from tourism, and that has got its own spin-offs with regards to the hospitality industry and the opportunity for job creation. So the opportunities are multiple, but for me, I guess the one that stands out is the ability, the extent to which we are able to exchange, learn and unlearn from the experiences to resolve the challenges of the now and prepare for the future.
Despite the long list of challenges that African cities are grappling with, there is a degree of consensus on what the priority interventions should be. The African Union Agenda of 2063 appears to have been translated into the economic blueprints of national governments, and this is the basis around which the diplomatic corps, government and business are rallied around.
The first thing we must do on the continent is to share our experiences. There are a lot of things that are happening in Africa, a lot of projects that are being undertaken which will have a regional impact, continental impact. We need to share those, so we work together in a major project. A project like Inga Dam in the DRC, it's a continental project, so we need to cooperate because it's going to have an impact to the people of the continent of Africa. The infrastructure projects, they integrate the continent, especially the road network, the railroads, and so forth. Those are projects that will integrate the continent, so we should be sharing those. Educational system, we need to develop institutions of high learning that will emphasize science and technology, because we're behind in that field. The digital divide is there. So we need to share those experiences, which means that we need to have constant conversations, whether it's in the form of seminar, workshop, conferences, and so forth. We need to have a continuous conversations on those issues that will affect the continent. Sometimes we meet once every 3 months, once a year, and so forth. After the meeting, you forget even things you discussed. But if the dialogue, the conversation is continuous, it remains fresh in your mind. That's what we should do. There is a gap between the social media in Africa and the leadership. Leadership is not using the same methods to disseminate the information, to communicate with the people. We use the traditional method, television, radios, television, newspapers, but we don't use the social media to communicate with our people. And that's what the leadership in Africa will start doing. And then if the leaders are involved in interacting within the social media, they will know what's going on within the population. They know someone is planning something bad, or they know someone is planning something good, so that we don't get surprised by the events. You know, when you see the Arab Springs, it was a big surprise to everybody. But this thing was being planned. It was being discussed. It was part of the conversation within the social media. But the leadership is not part of the conversation, so sometimes leadership doesn't know what's going on. So they need to link themselves up and develop their capacity to interact with the community through the social media.
The most rewarding aspect of this is the interaction. It gives us a chance to network with yourself, with the executive members of your province, with the mayors, and so forth.
Meanwhile, human capital is increasingly becoming a strategic advantage for Africa. With almost 200 million people aged between 15 and 24, Africa has the youngest population in the world, and it keeps growing rapidly. The number of young people in Africa will double by 2045. However, the rate at which young Africans are leaving the continent in search of better job opportunities is eroding the human capital base.
We need to build the institution of high learning so that we can master science and technology. We in Africa, our children sometimes are afraid of science and technology. Most students are afraid of math. Math is the easiest thing to learn, but we're afraid of it because we have made it look like it's not attainable for Africans. Because if we have the knowledge, the goals, to transform our resources locally, we can create jobs. We're exporting our jobs to other countries, whereas we have our population in Africa is mainly, it's a young population. The majority of people in Africa are under ages of 35. So they need jobs. Why are we exporting jobs through the exportation of our raw materials? We can transform them locally. So those are issues we should be talking about. They should be part of their continuous conversation. First, we have to create a condition for them when they come back to work. For instance, a doctor who has specialized in some field, neurosurgery or something, when he comes back, he had to find the same condition, the same equipment, the same environment that he left overseas. But if he doesn't have that working environment, he's going to go back because he cannot apply his knowledge fully. So we need to create conditions to motivate our young people to come back and contribute through their knowledge and so forth.
Job creation is at the center of Africa's strategy to attract Africans back to the continent, to diversify economies and to industrialize. The private sector holds the key that can unlock these opportunities. But without a conducive business environment, business in Africa will remain hampered and unable to deliver.
Well, the South African economy, and particularly the Gauteng economy, it's already highly integrated into the SADC economy. So we already highly integrated because integration is important. So we have the most developed infrastructure. So we will start first and foremost with the SADC countries, improve trade and investment in the SADC countries. But we would like to go to the east. East Africa is rising in a very big way, and West Africa. There are major economies like Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania in the east that are playing a very key role. And then the west, Nigeria, Ghana, in that way. So we already have a lot of South African companies that are Gauteng based, that are in these different parts of our continent. But sometimes if we don't, particularly as a political leadership, if we don't advocate for that, business people often feel they are very vulnerable to the uncertainties. So we want to work as government also with cities and provinces in the different parts of the continent. I certainly know that the South African government at the level of our, especially the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, it's very, very involved with, together with the Department of Trade and Industry.
DIRCO remains committed to further developing and strengthening South Africa's relations with the African continent and is ready to work with African countries and the provinces, particularly Gauteng.
Our diplomats, especially our ambassadors in these countries, are very fully involved in trying to resolve the issues. And that's the normal course of their work, that when our businesses are encountering difficulties, the first port of call is the South African mission in that country. Well, I guess, every country has got its own culture, including a business culture. And, we can always do our best to educate our business people when they go into the different parts of our continent, to carry with them that South African banner. Because South Africa goes into the different parts of the continent to resolve disputes without arrogance. Because we understand the sensitivities. We go into many parts of the continent, we get called there to come and assist. We would like our business people to carry that spirit, that you have to go into these countries not to think you know it all, and in fact you will fail miserably if that's your attitude. Find local partners and the right local partners, and build on what they know, their expertise, their experience, to grow your business in these countries. And it must be on the basis of genuine partnership and mutually beneficial partnerships.
Companies such as EY have stepped up to the plate to bring consulting services that make it even easier to do business in Africa.
We survey about 500 global business people and ask them questions as to whether they can or cannot invest on this continent. And if they do, what are the reasons thereof? If they don't, why not? It is important for us to share their perspective, because it will guide the ambassadors, the commissioners, the politicians, government leaders into how best to plan when coming to infrastructure, because that's important for any investor. How best to plan in terms of doing regional integration as African leaders. To also focus on the questions that they ask, why they are not investing on the continent. So I think the one that we must worry about, as it was demonstrated this evening, is the state of infrastructure in most countries, which is really not yet to the extent that an investor not in infrastructure will be keen to invest in that country. For an investor in infrastructure is a good thing because it shows where they can go and invest in improving the infrastructure of that country.
EY has recently launched Growing Beyond Borders, a tool that visually represents data from all the world's markets. As African businesses increasingly expand into each other's markets, Growing Beyond Borders becomes a critical lens through which the risks and opportunities in the target markets can be assessed.
We realize that it's important as a firm to have data that back up why people should invest in Africa. It compares many things. It looks at ease of doing business, it looks at GDP growth, it looks at the state of infrastructure. So when investors are keen to do business in the continent, the tool guides them how long it will take for them to start business, if they have to do business in that country, what is expected of them to do. It also helps them shape their strategies as they integrate in the continent. Obviously decide where, if they have to have head office on the continent, where should that be located. So it's a very important tool for us as it helps with the integration of our business first as EY and the integration of Africa.
The Premier's dinner also afforded ambassadors to share the investment opportunities that exist in their home countries. The Botswana High Commissioner to South Africa highlighted the opportunities in agriculture, water and energy infrastructure.
Like many countries, there's quite a wide spectrum of opportunities that exist in Botswana. The area of focus that I like to mention first and foremost is the area of agriculture. We are trying to move into mechanization, into commercialization, and I think therein lies an opportunity for investors from countries like South Africa to move into that space. The thing that makes it very attractive also is that agriculture is very labor intensive. So whether you're talking about poultry, the number of people that you can absorb immediately, because the biggest issue here you'll know is job creation, poverty alleviation, and those type of issues. So to absorb the youth that remains unemployed, 20% of our population is unemployed. You want to go into these type of areas where you can absorb quite a large number of your citizenry. But there's opportunities also in projects like water transfer schemes. South Africa has done it, tried and tested, so we want to invite South African firms to look into tenders in that space. We also want to look into electricity generation or electricity provision in the shortest time possible. We're talking here about gas and so on, solar and so on. We've seen how in the northwestern part of the country you have big solar projects. So there's quite a number of opportunities that exist, ICT space and so on and so forth. In Botswana, there's quite a number of incentives that come to mind immediately as you pose that question. The first one, no exchange controls. As a company, when you come into Botswana, you make 100 million, you want to send 100 million out, you send it out. You also want to talk about ownership of companies, 100% ownership of companies. You can be 100% owner of your own company, even though, of course, we encourage that you look into some form of partnership for skills transfer and so on. Botswana, as you may already know, is one of the least corrupt countries in Africa, in the world. If you look at macroeconomic policies, for example, Botswana has got sound macroeconomic policies that are predictable. These are some of the advantages that make us a very interesting country to invest in. If you look at some of the international rating agencies, as it relates to Botswana, Standard & Poor's, Moody's and so on, we have very high credit rating because of some of the initiatives that I've just made mention of. We have an 80+% literacy rate, which means our citizens are ready to be absorbed and they are trainable whatever specification that you may want.
While the focus on African growth is usually on big business, small business has a key role to play in providing opportunities and creating new jobs in emerging economies.
And if you look at some of the leading economies in the world, the drivers of those economies are small to medium enterprises. And I guess for us, there's a great deal of emphasis that is placed on big business, when in fact there are pristine opportunities that they exist at levels below big business. I'm glad that there's a policy dispensation in the country spearheaded by the DTI to help small business to get to appreciate, identify and also exploit opportunities on the continent. And I guess that when they land in those countries, the environment must be such that it's receptive of their ideas and innovation. I mean, if you come to think of it, you go to a typical township in Gauteng, and in fact in South Africa, you'll find that some of the most thriving businesses, small-scale enterprises owned by people from Central Africa, East Africa. So it just demonstrates that the opportunities are there. Is the extent of the appetite to exploit those opportunities. And I guess that one of the major shortcomings on how business gets to conduct itself here in our country, we only always think big, when in fact you can start small scale and modularize. I mean, scalability is important. And I guess that these are some of the lessons that we get from our Somali brothers, the kind of work that they are doing, pooling of resources, going into the market, get the benefits with regards to price because of the scale. You've got buying power, and therefore your bargaining power also increases in the same manner.
The leadership is there, but sometimes it's a matter of not knowing exactly what to do to implement those things or to attract our children who are operating overseas to come back. It's a matter of how do I do it? And sometimes in some countries I've seen that the leadership might even be afraid of those young people coming back because they think they're going to come and challenge their leadership. That's not the case, because if he's a scientist, if he's a neurosurgeon, he's not going to be interested in politics. He's come there to treat the patient and so forth and so on. So it's a matter of the leadership having the courage and creating the conditions for the Congolese, the Africans in diaspora to come back home and get involved in development. All of them, they consider themselves Africans, but sometimes they are lost because they don't know where to start.
And I think there's a question of culture, there's a question of values. Botswana is based on very interesting values that were even there before independence. The values of self-reliance, the values of development, unity, Botu. You know, those are some of the values that have taken us from pre-independence through to independence, and even as we speak, they form the core tenets of our foreign policy. Okay, so our interaction with the world is based on some of those values, and I think it really stems from there. That you know, you are not allowed to benefit for yourself, you benefit for the country. For example, Botswana is one country that more often than not is mentioned to have been able to avoid the resource curse, the mineral resource curse. Why? Because when you find diamonds underneath your house, they are not yours, then they belong to the state in that case. And then what happens is we will extract those diamonds and then spread the wealth from the diamonds for the betterment of society, building schools, basically for development purposes. So I think it's very important, the culture and what have you, the values that underpin a given society.
And it's something that we have started with the diplomats who represent African countries in Tshwane. We have now had more than 4 meetings, almost every quarter, sitting with them and inviting business to come and share with them the kind of opportunity that exist in their respective countries, but also someone like myself as the mayor of Tshwane get to share with the diplomats the kind of opportunities that are here. because I don't think that it's going to be a one-way exchange, a two-way exchange. We go into other parts of the continent and we also invite the investment into this area. And I guess that's an area that requires our collective attention. I mean, the intra-African trade, it's something that has a huge potential of lifting the economy of our country and the continent as a whole. There are mineral endowments, beneficiation is happening outside the continent. So I guess that if we start this conversation, we are candid about this engagement, we are likely going to reap the fruits of these exchanges.
The resounding theme from tonight's conversations has been partnerships, partnerships, and more partnerships. It certainly seems that African markets, African governments have to work together if we are to realize Africa's ambitions of economic transformation and industrialization. For myself, Nozi Pumbandra, reporting here from Emperor's Palace in Johannesburg, it's good night.